Hi, welcome to the channel. This platform, along with my first video, being this one, is going to help teach you how to animate at a beginner level. Each of the tutorials will focus on a few of the 12 principles of animation, introduced by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. The basic layout of these tutorials will involve me providing a definition, then an example, and an exercise for you, the viewer. I'll be animating side by side with a time-lapse of my work in the background to help you guys visualize animation. In case these initial exercises feel easy, I'll follow up with a challenge after, as well as an easier exercise for anyone struggling. For anyone who's curious or wanting to learn more, I'll link some cool videos that inspired me in the description below. Feel free to learn as much as you want from those. With that, let's get started. First off, however, what is animation? Animation is defined simply as a sequence of images that, when moving in quick enough succession, can give the illusion of a continuously moving image. Every image that makes up an animation is called a frame. Animations always have a certain amount of frames per second. People usually animate at around 12 frames per second, aka animating on 2s, or 24 frames per second, which is animating on 1s. The entirety of these tutorials will be animated on 2s, as that's the standard and a little more beginner friendly in my opinion. Quick disclaimer regarding the types of animation. I'll only be teaching traditional/digital animation, as that's all I know so far, so I unfortunately won't be diving into concepts like stop motion animation or flipbooking for the time being. Now let's move on. There's always a medium or canvas to animate on, be it paper or softwares, so let's get into the details of that. For this video, I'll be using Flip-a-Clip. It's easily accessible and beginner-friendly, and more importantly, free, so I recommend it. Feel free to use any other softwares that are more convenient for you guys. I'll link a website with some more animation softwares in the description if you're curious on that. Alright, quick lesson for people who are using Flip-a-Clip. Here we are in the app. Let's navigate it. On the bottom middle, we have a plus button. On clicking that, we're greeted to our canvas that we can name and change the background color of, along with the canvas size and its frame rate. Let's just keep those on the default settings, name our project, and create it. When entering the project, take a quick look at the squares on the bottom. Those are our frames, and on tapping the frame you can see a few options. There's the trash can, which deletes the frame, a pair of squares with one of them being a bunch of lines, which is how you can copy the frame. On pressing that button, a new option with 2 complete squares will show up, and on clicking that, it pastes the frame that you just copied. Finally, the square with the plus and an arrow creates an empty frame before or after the selected frame. On the left, you can see your tools. Clicking on them brings you to other menus where you can change the color, size of the brush, or the tools themselves. The eraser functions similarly. The lasso allows you to draw a ring around your drawing, giving you the ability to change its size or position. On the top right, you can see your redo and undo buttons, along with a ruler that can help with drawing perfect lines or circles. Now on to the principles. Our first principle we're going to be focusing on is squashing and stretching. What is it? Simplified, it's just how an object squashes or stretches when interacting with its environment, factoring its volume, momentum, and mass. So here we see this ball. If I push on it this way, the sides will squish outwards in response to the push. The amount of squashing and stretching you apply to an object can also hint at how soft or tough it is, as well as its acceleration and energy. Let's look at this bouncing ball. If I apply some squash and stretch to its fall and landing impact, you can see how it pancakes as it falls, and when it hits the ground, it looks like a soft, bouncy ball. By removing the effect, however, it now resembles something more tough, like a basketball. It's important to apply this in moderation to your animation to help bring to life the scene you imagined. Now let's animate. With this exercise, we're going to be animating a ball bouncing from one end of the screen to the other. Before we start, as a small recommendation, I draw a line near the bottom of the animation so I can tell where the ball is going to bounce, as well as a pathway for the ball to take, so I have a better idea of what I'm going to animate. Let's start on the left. First, we'll draw the ball appearing into frame. From there we can redraw the circle further and further outward until it starts to be affected by gravity. Now we apply the principle. As it falls, the ball should start to stretch out into a pancake-like form. Note here that it's important to keep the volume consistent. When squashing or stretching, the volume shouldn't change much, so making the ball too big or small here will make the animation wonky. As the ball hits the ground, it should turn flat, the most pancake-like it can get, and on the next frame it'll bounce right back up to emphasize the ball's impact speed. As it goes back in the air, it should transform into a circle again, until it reaches the apex of its bounce, and then simply repeat the process until the ball gets to the right. And we're done. If that exercise didn't feel right, then I have some others to give a try. Instead of having the ball bounce from one end to the other, you could simply have it fall down and bounce back up while applying the principle. If those are too hard or confusing, then we can go back to the squishy circle I mentioned at the start. Simply animate its squash and stretch by having it squish as demonstrated earlier, using the things we learned and applying it. Alright, so the next one we're going to be focusing on is timing. Timing is how the feeling of an animation changes depending on the amount of frames stacked in between each other. For example, having a lot of frames that are close together make movement slow, whereas having few frames that are spread out makes the movement really fast. Let's use this bread as another example. By having multiple frames close to each other, the animation won't move too fast. However, by spacing the frames fewer and further between, it speeds up a lot. To sum it all up, timing is important to understand the feeling of a motion in animation. Now let's animate it. So for this exercise, we're going to be using a bowling ball. We're going to draw it passing from the left to the right 3 times. By using timing, we're going to make the ball move faster on each pass. First, we'll start off with marking our path for the bowling ball, and then drawing the circles moving across the scene for the first pass through. Once we get the circles finished, let's add the details like the holes and the number. Alright, looking good for our first pass. Let's make the second one. Now, for our third pass, let's space the frames out enough to really give it some speed. And that's it. If the exercise didn't feel right or was difficult, I have an alternative. It's formally called the magic dot, and the basic premise is drawing a dot and messing around with its movement however you feel. By applying the principle, you could draw it zipping around quickly with fast trails, or slowly pacing by the screen in order to get a better understanding of the principle. You can also mess around with your creativity here in several ways, like making the dot bigger or smaller as it moves around. By all means, you don't have to do all the exercises I've talked about, though you're more than welcome to if you want. Simply choose the one that feels right. As a takeaway from the principles, I'd like to add that I recommend on experimenting with more creative concepts in a ball if you feel up to it, like using timing on a plane or squash and stretch on a planet, or other fun stuff. I'm really hoping that these videos prove to be helpful, so for anyone who learns to create an animation from this video, please send that to my Instagram in the description below. I'd like to see how it turns out. Along with that, feel free to ask any questions at all in the comments regarding anything that I could do to improve my videos and tutorials. With that said, stay creative. Later.